All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video, guys. This is going to be a controversial one right here. Heavily opinionated, hotly debated, but it should be very fun regardless, guys. So we are doing an MLB Franchises Tier List. So basically, we are going to take a look at every one of the 30 MLB franchises and deciding where they rank in the grand scheme of things in terms of what have they accomplished in their entire franchise's history, past, present, recently, not recently. We're going to combine that all together and give my honest opinion on where I think they rank in the epic of MLB history. So basically that means that an S tier franchise is the most storied of franchises. These guys are the big dogs, the ones who have accomplished by far and away the most. These are the most storied franchises. I think there's a couple that might jump to the front of that list, obviously. A tier, I would say, is still a great franchise. Maybe you can say storied franchise. Yeah, storied franchise, but not indisputably storied. Sorry, I forgot English for a second. But these are still very accomplished, respectable franchises. B tier, I would say, is still respectable. This franchise has a good past, good history. They've accomplished a solid number of things. C tier is kind of like, I mean, they've done some stuff, not too much though. They've had some bad years, and there are a lot of things they haven't accomplished, and there's stuff lacking in their franchise's history. And last but least, definitely least, the D tier are for franchises that you could maybe say they're a bad or pathetic franchise, a laughable organization, potentially. Those are the bottom feeders, guys, in the grand scheme of things. Again, so I'm going to try not to be too biased in terms of about the present or biased about the past. I'm going to try to combine the two of them. Guys, definitely comment your opinions, and without wasting any more time, because we've already wasted 2 minutes, guys, let's get right into this tier list. It starts with the Angels. What a hilarious way to start. The Anaheim Angels, formerly California Angels before that, then the current Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. Guys, once upon a time, this franchise wasn't too bad. They won a World Series in 2002. They've had Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani. Nolan Ryan pitched for this franchise, okay? Tim Salmon, let's not forget that 0-2 team. Troy Percival, I'm just throwing out names that might be forgotten one day, but you know what? This is a D-tier franchise because of the recent ownership, the last 20 years, the way that they have disappointed us every year with their horrible farm system, horrible managing, horrible ownership. Art Moreno, I'm so glad Art Moreno is selling this franchise. He has wasted the careers of many greats, especially and obviously Mike Trout and now Shohei Ohtani. This franchise has destroyed themselves the last 2 decades plus, and I definitely think they're a D-tier organization, in my opinion. Then we move on to the Houston Astros. Look, this might be one of the tougher ones to rank because they've gone back and forth, because for a long time, this franchise was probably a C or D tier franchise. They hadn't really won much. They had been to one World Series before 2017, and that was in 2005. They lost it. They got swept. So maybe they were a C or D tier franchise. Then they won the World Series in 2017, but we all know they cheated. And then the last 5 or 6 years, they've been a great team, but how legit has that been? They've been scrutinized. So I don't really know. I'm going to say, because they're still a great team the last 4 or 5 years, and they're not cheating now, they're still the best team in the American League, I'm going to put them at C tier because they've played way better than a C tier franchise in the last few years. But before that, they hadn't accomplished too much, never won a World Series before they won again in 2017. But they're disgraced, at least to some regards, because of the cheating scandal. So I won't say D tier because they're the best team in the AL and they've been a great team for the last several years. But I think everything considered, they're a C-tier franchise. And then we have the Oakland A's, who are an absolutely atrocious team right now. But this team has accomplished so much. They've won many World Series. They won 3 World Series in a row. They three-peated in the 70s, right? They took down the Big Red Machine. They've beaten the Dodgers. They won the World Series in 1989. They've been competitive many times in the 2000s, not too long ago. We're talking about the Moneyball team in 2002. They've had a lot of memorable teams. This is a great franchise overall, despite playing in a garbage ballpark. Not quite S tier, but you know what? Fittingly, the A's, I think, are an A-tier franchise. They have accomplished a lot and won a lot in the past. Then we have the Toronto Blue Jays, the one team that does not reside in the United States of America, of course. They've won 2 World Series, 92 and 93 back-to-back. They've had some good moments in the 21st century. Obviously, the Jose Bautista bat flip, that epic moment in 2015. They're good again now with Guerrero, Bichette. They've had a lot of good players, but they've had some bad years as well. I'm considering B tier for now. You know what? I'm going to put them in B tier. This is not a very old franchise, but they've won 2 World Series. They've had a lot of memorable teams, and now they're relevant. And they're not always, recently they're not usually irrelevant. They've been a playoff team many times, or playoff caliber team many times in the last decade. I think B tier is fitting for Toronto, and they have great fans, obviously. They show up in the postseason, so I will put them in the B tier. Then we have the defending champions, the Atlanta Braves. They've done a lot, especially in the last 30 years, because when they won in 95, that was their first championship in the city of Atlanta, but they won last year. They've had a lot of greats in the last 20, 30 years. They're great now, and they're very much relevant, and they've had a lot of great pitchers, you know, Greg Maddux, John Smoltz, right? This is, and Chipper Jones, great hitters as well. You know what? I think right now the Braves are an A franchise. Maybe if this were a year ago, I might have said B, but they won another World Series, and they're very much relevant now. I think they deserve to be an A franchise right now. Then we have the Milwaukee Brewers, who have not had too much success because before these last 3 or 4 years, in the first 65 to 70 years of the franchise, they had only made the playoffs, I think, 4 times. They've made the World Series once in 1982, but they've never won a World Series. And, you know, I think Bob Uecker alone maybe makes this franchise more relevant. They've had some good moments, but ultimately no incredible success. Only 1 World Series appearance. But they're competitive now. They've been competitive the last several years. So I think the last 4 or 5 years, maybe there were a period of time they could have even been D, but I'm going to say they're a C tier franchise. They've accomplished some things. They're not pathetic by any means. And, you know, especially now, the last few years, again, they've made themselves at least relevant enough to stay out of D tier. Then we have the St. Louis Cardinals. I believe this is going to be our first S-tier franchise because the Cardinals have won many World Series, had many legendary players. We all know, come on, Bob Gibson starts with him, right? And then Big Mac, Mark McGwire, despite, you know, the cheating and stuff. But even these recent players they've had, you know, Adam Wainwright, Yadier Molina, the great Albert Pujols, who could forget him. This team is always good. I don't remember a time the Cardinals were not a good team, and they're almost always a playoff team. A lot of years they're a contender. They're just a high quality, high class, extremely respectable organization that has won many, many World Series. So I would have to put them in the S tier, no doubt about it, in my opinion. Then we have the Chicago Cubs. Now, if this were a tier list for the most popular franchises, I would put the Cubs in the S tier. Now, the Cubs have a great history in terms of memorable history. I wouldn't say great because we all know about the 108-year drought. They had done not much. They were pretty pathetic for about 80 years, and they choke all the time. They're the lovable losers, and now they're irrelevant again. But that 2016 team, moments like that, the rare moments in their history when they have been great, it's very memorable. So because of that respect for their fan base and how memorable they can be as a franchise, I'll put them in A tier. But look, I cannot put them in S tier because they're for a majority of this franchise's long history, they have not accomplished much. They were the lovable losers for a long time. They have choked many a time. I cannot put them in S tier. I am sorry, Cubs fans, but the fans are S tier fans. The fan base, popularity, they're an S tier franchise in that regard, but not accomplishment-wise. I am sorry. Then we have the Arizona Diamondbacks. This team would be definitely D tier. That 2001 World Series team is a valid argument for why maybe they deserve to be higher than D tier. But, I mean, I'm still going to put them in the D tier because they're not that old of a franchise, only about 25 years old, but they don't have the greatest fans when they're not good, and they haven't been good for most of their franchise's history. They've had a few good years, but especially recently, they're bad. They've traded away their stars like Goldschmidt. They traded Pollock away and Greinke, and, it's just not a great product most years for them. But that World Series and Randy Johnson and stuff, they've had good moments, but I still think they're a D-tier franchise. Then we have the Los Angeles Dodgers. Easy S-tier. I am a huge Dodgers fan, but whether or not you're a Dodgers fan, it doesn't matter, because this team has broken barriers with Jackie Robinson, right? They've had legendary broadcasters like Vin Scully, the greatest broadcaster ever. They're always good. The last 10 years, they have been the best team in baseball over the last 10 years, and that is obvious with this incredible run they've had recently. Many World Series, not much more you can say. LA, biggest media market, Dodger Stadium. I mean, it's just classic. In every regard, the Dodgers are an amazing franchise, no doubt about it. And as much as it pains me to say this, I would be an idiot if I didn't also put the Giants in the S tier. These two West Coast teams, they came to the West Coast together. Their rivalry, it's legendary. The Giants have won as many times as the Dodgers, basically. I think they both have 7. I know the Dodgers have 7 World Series titles, but I believe the Giants do as well. We know the greats that have played for them. We know in the last 10 years they've won 3 times. Last year, how great of a team they were. In the past, how great of a team they were. Yes, they did have a 50-something year drought before they won in 2010, but it doesn't matter because there have been many great players playing for the Giants, and we know how storied of a franchise they are. Then we have the Cleveland Guardians, who currently have the longest World Series drought. I mean, every franchise has had great players. They have as well. They're good right now. The last 5 or 10 years, 5-ish, 5, 6, 7 years, they've been good. They're winning their division. Not a D-tier franchise, but they've had some bad moments as well. The C tier for a team with whose logo is a C, I think is fitting. But then again, are they a lower tier franchise than the Blue Jays? I might have to come back to the Blue Jays, guys. But for now, you know what? I'm going to put Cleveland in the B tier. I think that they do have a long history. They've had some bad moments, but they've also had a lot of good moments as well. And this team in the past accomplished a lot of things. So I think for now, actually, I'm going to put Cleveland in the B tier. They're competitive most years, but we'll see. I might have to come back to that, guys. Seattle Mariners, I love the city they play in. They've had a lot of great players, but this is the only franchise that has never been to the World Series. But they're competitive now. They're exciting to watch most years. They've had many great players like Ichiro, Edgar Martinez, Ken Griffey, obviously. So because of those greats, and they did have the greatest winning season of all time in 2001, despite the long playoff drought, no World Series appearances, I just don't think the Mariners belong in the D tier. I think they're a C tier franchise, in my opinion. Yeah, and I think they're going to make the playoffs this year in all likelihood, and I think C tier's fitting for the Mariners. I think they're better than what they haven't done, if that makes any sense. Then we have the Miami Marlins. Now, the Marlins are one of the weirdest franchises, I think, in sports, because they've won 2 World Series in their 30-ish years of existence as a franchise, but they've never won their division. Their home ballpark has no attendance. It's like a library most years, and most years they're bad, not relevant, and kind of pathetic they have like no budget. They're totally irrelevant in the grand scheme of Major League Baseball most years. I'm sorry, Marlins fans, with the exception of those 2 World Series. But those 2 years, they didn't win their division, so they've never really had an indisputably great team. They never really had a truly great all-time team. So despite the 2 World Series and not being around for too long and still having won 2 World Series, I think if you combine everything with their management and fan base, I think this is a D-tier franchise because, let's be honest, who's really thinking about the Marlins? I don't really think they're a relevant franchise. I think they're a D-tier franchise, in my opinion. We move on to the New York Mets, another NL East team, from one NL East team to another, the New York Mets. A lot of people like to say they are the little brothers of the Yankees, but you know what? The Mets, they've had some rough years, but they've had some great years too, and they're so popular. And the lights are on in Citi Field. They have great fans. They're great now. And when they are great, it is a great thing and great spectacle to behold. So I don't think the Mets are an S-tier franchise, but with the great moments they've had and how popular they are, they're kind of like the Cubs. They've had some bad moments as well. they're not really lovable losers, but you know what I mean. Even when they're not good, they're still talked about and popular. I think they're an A-tier franchise that has had a lot of good moments as well, so we'll put them in A-tier. Washington Nationals, I would have said easy D-tier. Then they won the World Series in 2019, and then I was like, wow, you know what? Maybe they're not D-tier. And now they're back to D-tier. I'm sorry. Guys, the Nationals, they've mismanaged a lot. They don't have too much of a history, obviously. If you want to combine the Expos, I mean, they have a shared history with the Montreal Expos. But even with them, like, they do have the World Series, but they choke many times. And you know, there's a lot of disappointment in that franchise. And they've mismanaged their star players. They've traded a lot of their star players with Juan Soto. They let Rendon go. They shouldn't have signed Strasburg to that extension. The Bryce Harper thing, him leaving was good in at that time because they won the World Series the next year. But regardless of that World Series, this franchise is back to being disappointing. And one World Series I don't think necessarily takes you out of D-tier. Like, all four of these D-tier teams have won at least one World Series. But I don't think one World Series can exempt you from the D-tier, which can be seen with these four teams. Then we have the Baltimore Orioles, who have won multiple World Series. You know what? I respect the Orioles. I think they're a B-tier franchise. You might not like this, but this team has had a lot of great players. Eddie Murray, Brooks Robinson. This team won a lot back in the day. And I know they haven't been good in the last, 20 years, but they were horrible before this year. But this team's exciting, so they're kind of resurfacing, but they've been completely irrelevant for the last several years. But the Orioles, I don't know. I like Camden Yards. It feels like there's a classic vibe with the Orioles franchise, and they've had greats. They've done a lot in the past, so we can't forget about the past. This is one of those examples where we shouldn't be biased about the present. The past matters too. I think the Orioles are a B-tier franchise. Then we have the San Diego Padres. I'm going to try not to be biased because I'm a Dodgers fan, but guys, I have to put him in D tier. I'm sorry. This team, Mr. Padre himself, Tony Gwynn, that's one of the only arguments that can keep them out of D tier. But look, this team can be exciting like they are now, like they've been the last couple years, but they always find a way to disappoint. And just when you think they're going to do great things, they don't do as great of things as you wish or think they're going to do. They've never won a World Series. You can't, the ballpark and the city's beautiful, obviously, but we're talking about accomplishments, and for the most part, talking about accomplishments, and the Padres haven't accomplished much, and I can't put them anywhere other than D tier because of how disappointing they've been historically and right now. So unfortunately, Padres fans, I'm sorry, D tier. Phillies, this is a great franchise. For the most part, I think the Phillies are an A-tier franchise. They're really good now. Yes, it's been a 10-year playoff drought, but they've had a lot of great moments. You know, the Ryan Howard, Chase Utley team and Jimmy Rollins team that won the World Series in 2008, then made it again in 2009. So they've had different eras of greatness. The Mike Schmidt days in the 70s and 80s. This Phillies team's had a lot of greats. Roy Halladay. The fans are great. This team always feels relevant in the Philadelphia market. And I think they're a great franchise. I really do most of the time. I think they're an A-tier franchise. We have the Pittsburgh Pirates next, from one Pennsylvania team to another. Guys, the Pirates are kind of like the Orioles. Right now, in the last several years, they haven't been relevant. Maybe the last 30 years, with the exception of a few years with MVP caliber Andrew McCutchen. But we can't forget about the history of the Pirates. This team was great in the 70s, great in the 60s and 80s as well. I think this is the franchise where I think one player the most affects this franchise's history. I think Roberto Clemente single-handedly makes the Pirates a B-tier franchise with what he has done for that franchise, how memorable of a player he was. And I think with their history, what they have once upon a time done, I think that alone puts them in the B tier. So I think this is another example. Forget about what they haven't done recently. You got to remember the past, and this team has a storied past. So for that reason, I will put them in the B tier. Then we have the Texas Rangers. Oh, this one's tough. I'm debating between C and D tier. I mean, this team has had great players like Nolan Ryan, Josh Hamilton, Adrian Beltre. In the early 2010s, they had a good run, back-to-back World Series that they choked away, unfortunately for them. Never won a World Series, but I don't know. I'm going to put them in C tier. I don't know why. I don't know why they're ahead of the Padres and these guys, but recently, they made a couple splashes in free agency, but I don't know. I just don't think of the Rangers as really like a pathetic franchise. I don't know. I'll keep them in C tier. But the Mariners, you know what? I'm sorry. I was trying to convince myself. I know they got Corey Seager, Marcus Semien. They were very close to winning a World Series in 2011. But it would be hypocritical for me to put them in C tier. They have choked many a time, and I have to put them in D tier. They've never won a World Series, so I'll put them in D tier. Tampa Bay, and they're not that good now as well. Tampa Bay Rays, guys, this whole tier list is hard, even harder than I thought. As I'm realizing, guys, it's really difficult. Tampa Bay Rays, because they're relevant right now in the last few years, and they haven't been around for too long, so they haven't had too much time to develop a storied history. In the short time in which they've existed, I will put them in C tier because this is a franchise that has existed for like only 30 years. They've been to 2 World Series, never won, but been to 2. And recently they've had some success. And with a really low budget, I give this team credit for still putting out a playoff caliber product despite not having much of a budget to spend on. One of the lowest budgeted teams. They still have a great pitching staff. And with what they have, with the horrible stadium they play in, horrible ballpark, not a great fan base, this team finds a way with the cards they're dealt to be a respectable franchise. So I will put the Rays in C tier because of that. Then we have the Boston Red Sox. Before the World Series in 2004, the curse of the Bambino, obviously they still have a memorable history. I wouldn't have put them in S tier, but I think with this recent run in the 21st century, they're an S tier team. The last 18 years, they've won 4 World Series. And most years, they're obviously relevant. Playoff team, Fenway Park, great fans, great players. We all know the greats that have played for this team. The amazing postseason moments that this team has provided just in the last 20 years, let alone the many decades before that. The Red Sox, I think, are definitely an S-tier franchise. Then we have the Cincinnati Reds. Again, don't forget about the past. The greats, the Big Red Machine. That period of time in the 70s alone the Reds have put out a couple of the best teams that this league has ever seen, like led by Pete Rose, right? Joe Morgan, okay? Tony Perez, Johnny Bench. I think the Reds are an A-tier franchise. Don't forget about the past, guys. Remember it, the 70s, the Big Red Machine, some of the best teams ever. It would be disrespectful to put the Reds anywhere lower than the A-tier, despite being pretty pathetic the last handful of years. But I do like Joey Votto as well. So they've had some good players in the somewhat recent times, but they're not good now, obviously. But don't forget about the past. Colorado Rockies, this is easy. D tier. I know they haven't existed for a long time. And I know Rocktober, the run to the World Series, their only World Series appearance in 2007 was fun. They've had some good players, great players. Todd Helton, Troy Tulowitzki, Larry Walker. And Nolan Arenado, but they've mismanaged their stars. Their farm system's not good. They've been disappointing. They signed confusing contracts. I know the ballpark's tough to pitch in, but they've never had any great pitchers. They just, especially recently, they've proven that their management's really poor, and for the most part, most years, they're not a winning franchise. I know they're not that old of a franchise, but they've never won their division, and despite that one World Series appearance, that's not going to save them from being anywhere higher than D tier. I am sorry, Rockies fans out there. The ballpark's beautiful, and it's fun as a road team to play in there. It's entertaining, but that entertaining doesn't equate to being good, successful, and or storied, so we'll put the Rockies in D tier. Kansas City Royals, they've had moments. They won the World Series in 2015. They won the World Series in 1985. George Brett. They've had that team in 2014 and 15. They were interesting, good, but they've also had a long period of time of not being good. But those 2 World Series, handful of division titles, some great players, and relatively recently they were the best team in baseball and relevant and won a World Series not too long ago. So I think C is appropriate for the Royals. Yeah, I think C is appropriate. I think that makes sense for the Royals. We move on to the Detroit Tigers, a classic franchise, one of the oldest ones in the sport. They've accomplished a lot. Miggy Cabrera, they made the World Series in 2012, 2006, lost both of them, but they did win in 1984. They've won before that as well. They've had a lot of good teams, but they've also had a lot of moments of not being too relevant. Like now, they've been horribly disappointing this year. But you know what? I think they're a B-tier franchise. You can't forget about the past. The Tigers are one of the more classic franchises in Major League Baseball, I think, so we can't forget about that, the greats that they have had, the past, the storied past that they've had. So I think they're a B-tier franchise. We have the Minnesota Twins, who play in beautiful Minneapolis, Minnesota. They're a pretty solid team now. The last few years, they've had some good teams. They did win a couple World Series within the last 30 years, I believe 87 and 1990. Those were some good moments. But they've also had moments of irrelevance. They've been the worst team in baseball a couple times not too long ago. I think they're a C-tier franchise. I think alongside the Royals, they've won a couple World Series, had good moments. There's respect to be given to this franchise. But again, it's not like they've had so many great players and so many amazing moments. They've had some good moments, some great moments, but not enough to be one of the upper tier franchises, in my opinion. We have two more franchises here. We have the Chicago White Sox. Oh, this one's tough because they won the World Series in 2005. Again, I think relevancy is an important thing as well. Not just franchise accomplishments, but how much does baseball and fan bases, how much do they care about this franchise? I think the White Sox have a certain popularity that I think puts them in the B tier. I think with their relevancy of being in Chicago, being the South Side team, the kind of classic black and white color scheme that they use. They've won a couple World Series. They've had some great players like the big hurt Frank Thomas. The last couple years, they've been a competitive team. So despite having long periods of not being good, they're a popular team and they're relevant, and I think they matter in Major League Baseball. So for that, I don't think they're pathetic. I don't think they're a lower tier franchise. I think the South Side team is a B tier franchise. And it could not be more fitting to end this team with the most end this tier list with the most indisputed, no doubt, best franchise in sports. North American sports, the four major ones. The New York Yankees are the easiest S tier imaginable when talking about Major League Baseball. No doubt about it. There's no better conclusion to this tier list, guys, because the Yankees, their fans are critical of their team. There's criticisms. There's haters. So many people hate the Yankees, and I get that. But you know why they hate them? Because most people are jealous because they wish their franchise has won 27 World Series titles. I mean, I couldn't even name on my 10 fingers the greats on the Yankees. It's beyond 10. It's like a million. And I don't even need to explain it any further. It's the Yankees. Everyone knows how great of a franchise this is. Even when they're not good, they're always good because the fans will make them relevant. No one ever forgets them. It's New York, okay? New York, New York, beautiful New York, okay? So guys, that wraps up my MLB tier list for the franchises, all the 30 franchises in Major League Baseball. I like this tier list. I think every tier is represented properly. I think there are there's at least 5 franchises in every tier, and it's pretty well spaced out, I think. But some of these were tough calls, guys. You can make an argument to move some of these teams around, and I guarantee you'll disagree with me to some extent on some level, and I would love to hear your opinions on this. Where do you disagree with me? Where do you agree with me? Where does your favorite team or any other franchise, where do you think they truly rank? Let me know. Comment your opinions, guys. Like the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're a baseball fan and you haven't done so already. Consider doing it. Why not? It doesn't cost anything. It's easy to do. There's just one little button down there. But guys, that's going to be it for today's video, and I will see you all in the next one.